Hello and welcome to Mel Make Stuff. My name is Melissa and this is my Rhinebeck 2021 recap video. I had been to Rhinebeck 3 times in the past, but this was going to be the first year that my husband Frank was going with me, so I was both excited and a little bit apprehensive to see what he would think of the whole thing, because in years past, as a lot of you know, it has been absolutely crazy in terms of the number of people and all of that sort of thing. And so I didn't know quite what to expect from this year with the festival not having happened in 2020, but I figured now's as good a time as any for him to sort of be really introduced to our community. What do you expect Rhinebeck to be like?
I don't know. Bunch of, like a farmer's market type situation. Little petting zoos. Hopefully, petting zoos. You know, cool little, like, you know, knickknacks, handmade knickknacks all over the place.
Yep, that's about right. Neither of us could really take a whole ton of time off of work, so we just decided to drive over on the Friday, go to the festival on Saturday, and then come back on Sunday. There are many other events that have sort of risen up around the New York Sheep and Wool Festival. It's harder for newer makers to get a spot at the main festival, so all of these other events that have risen up are really nice as far as promoting indie makers and smaller vendors. Unfortunately, we weren't going to be able to visit any of those, but we did want to make 2 stops at 2 different wool mills on our way over. From our house in central Massachusetts, we ended up making a big U shape, basically driving up through Vermont to go to the Green Mountain Spinnery first. And then we drove almost straight west to go to Bat and Kill Fibers in New York State. And then we drove down to where we were staying before going to the festival on Saturday morning. I've been a fan of Green Mountain Spinnery's yarns for years, so it was great to finally visit the mill and really see how they make all these great products that they have. Green Mountain Spinnery is not just a wool mill, but they are a woolen mill. So they create woolen spun yarns there, and that has to do with their carding process. So as we were taking through the tour, they showed us how as the fibers go into the card the first time, it aligns them in one direction, and then they actually do a 90-degree turn of the fibers before they go into the second part of the card. And that is what helps jumble the fibers up and create the woolen spun nature of their yarns. I'm going to be making like a really short video about woolen versus worsted and what actually happens at the mill so that we can get a little bit more concise knowledge out there about the differences between these types of yarns, because I think that is confusing for a lot of folks. And understanding the difference between those two can really make a big difference when you are choosing yarns for your project. The folks at the mill were so patient with both me and Frank because we live our lives like a how it's made video. Like, we're always trying to figure out how things are done. And so we had a ton of questions and they were just great about answering all of them. Green Mountain Spinnery has been in operation since I think the very early 80s, if I recall correctly, but their machinery dates in some cases from a long time before that. Their carding machine had pieces from the 1910s, I think it was like 1915, 1916-ish. I just love seeing that these antique machines are still in daily use. It really shows what you can do with this old equipment if it's maintained properly. I was really tempted to buy some yarn while we were there at the mill, but I figured I would wait for the festival. I knew I was going to get some from them at the festival, and I just wanted to make sure that I could see really everything that they had available at the time. After we left Green Mountain, we ended up driving through Vermont to get over to New York State, and it was my first experience with driving on some covered bridges, which was very cool. And I think every time I had the camera up, Frank started zooming around in the car, so hopefully this footage isn't making anybody sick. The drive through Vermont was absolutely beautiful, as you would expect. Vermont in the fall is just a celebration of fall colors and all of those feelings that you get when you think of fall, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. That crisp, cold air, and the weather was just perfect. Sunny, but not too sunny. It was just what you would hope for on a Rhinebeck weekend. We got to the little town where Bat and Kill Fibers is located slightly early. I had an appointment for a tour there, so we stopped and got a coffee, walked around the little town. I came across this sewing shop, which I think offered classes and was also a tailor, and they had a great display of antique sewing machines in the front window, which was very cool to see. I have a couple of antique machines from my grandmother's, and one that was left at our old house when we bought it. So I'm interested in that sort of thing, and it was cool to see those. So the Battenkill mill is similar to Green Mountain in a lot of ways, but also different in one key way, which is that it is a worsted mill. So they spin worsted spun yarns. That mainly has to do with after the fiber comes out of the card, it is put through a pin drafter to further align the fibers so that those fibers are very aligned with each other and smooth when they go to be spun into the singles. And again, the folks who were working at Battenkill were so helpful as far as answering any of our questions and taking us around and really showing us the details of everything. It was interesting to see the differences in the equipment that they had there. What was at Green Mountain Spinnery was mostly older American-made machines from back when we had a thriving textile industry in this country. And the machines that Battenkill is using in a lot of instances are European-made, where they're still making a lot of textiles over there. And so the machinery is still being produced and is a little bit more modern. After leaving Battenkill, we started our drive down to where we were staying in New York State, which was a small town called Palinville. So we had to drive through Albany, and traffic was not bad during rush hour, which was sort of surprising, but maybe a factor of the pandemic still. I don't know. When we got there, we realized that it must be somehow related to the Rip Van Winkle tale, because everything was like the Rip Van Winkle this and that. So we ended up going to the Rip Van Winkle brewery, which had some amazing beers. I had never heard of this place before. I had a delicious IPA, and they also had Italian food, sort of strangely. I think Italian pub food is apparently a thing in the Hudson Valley. So we had a great pizza there, drank some beers, and went to our Airbnb where we were staying, which was actually a tiny house. And this tiny house came with a bonus cat who apparently had just shown up that day. He must have known Frank was coming because Frank is a cat man. He was not the owner's cat, had never seen him before, so we decided he could be our little friend for the weekend, and it was sort of nice to have an animal around because we're so used to having our little menagerie here at home. The next morning we got a better look at our little tiny house we were staying in, and it was laid out in a really cool way. It sort of made me think, oh yeah, I could live in a tiny house, but I would basically need an annex for all of my yarn, as we know. So I'm not sure that really counts as living in a tiny house anymore. The owner had a really beautiful, sort of wild looking flower garden out front that was growing in complete disarray, but was really pretty in that sort of disorganized kind of way. For my Rhinebeck sweater, since the weather was going to be pretty warm on the day we were going to the festival, I actually chose to wear an old make. I don't even remember how long ago I made this. It was some years ago, and I'm actually wearing it again today, so we can talk a little bit about it in detail. This is a linen version of the Tenya by Caitlin Hunter, and I had made this when I had first gotten Elizabeth Doherty's top-down sweater book, which I seem to be referencing in every podcast. It is completely worth the money if you are interested in sweater design at all, or making alterations to help things fit your upper body. I mean, who isn't interested in that sort of thing? I feel like it was relatively soon after the Tenya pattern came out, and there's something about the top of that sweater that I didn't love at the time. I think it's a drop shoulder. It's got like some short sleeves, if I remember correctly. And I wanted to change that so that it could be a tank top. I had 4 skeins of Quince & Co. Sparrow, which is 100% linen, that I wanted to use for this. And so I knew I wasn't going to have enough to do that sleeve, and also wasn't sure if it was going to look good on me. So I just changed the top of this to be a top-down set-in sleeve, like a tank style top. Now the original pattern is written bottom up, and there is lace at the bottom that I didn't really put 2 and 2 together and realize that it was not going to look the same if I knit that lace top down. And I didn't realize that until after I had gotten a good amount of the way into the top down body of this tank top. So what I decided to do was cast on another piece for the bottom and knit the lace up, and then graft the 2 pieces together, which in linen was not an easy feat, but it was not as bad as I was expecting it to be. You just have to pay attention to your tension if you're doing something like that, I guess. Here you can see how it looks. The top is completely different from the original pattern. This, I did a pretty good job here, I think, of getting this to hit correctly at the correct spot under my arm, so it really doesn't show what I'm wearing underneath. I am wearing a little very light pink colored camisole underneath here. And here is the lace. And the other change that I made here was to add beads, which hopefully are coming across. They're relatively similar to the light gray color of the yarn, but they have a pinkish tinge to them. And I just took the chart for the pattern and I just colored in where I wanted to put those beads. Like I took a little highlighter and marked where I wanted to put them on each stitch. And then I just went for it. It was my first time ever beading anything, and I used the dental floss method, which I will try to find a tutorial for in link below. And the point where I grafted, which you can maybe see, is right here at the top of the lace. So you would think it's right here, but this is actually in the middle of the lace section still. And this, you can see a little bit of irregularity in these stitches here, and that is where it was grafted. When I'm wearing it, you can't really tell. I don't wear this a whole lot because I feel like it's sort of, it comes down rather low, and I wear a lot of like cropped things lately, but I'm glad that I pulled it out because I think that I will continue to wear this now. It's just one of those things, you know, you get out of the habit of wearing certain garments. But yeah, so this is my Rhinebeck sweater for this year. So the festival itself, I think this was where Frank started to wonder what he had gotten himself into. I love you.
I love you too.
Oh. We got there around 10:30, 10:45, and there were a lot of people there already. And as we walked up, so you go in through the main entrance, or there are a number of different entrances, but when you go in, you pick up the festival brochure, which has a map and shows you where all the vendors are. This is what this year's look like. And if you haven't been to Rhinebeck before, here is the map of all the barns. And this might give you a little bit of an idea of the scope. All of these barns have either vendors or animals, or there's an equipment auction. There are many booths inside each of these barns here. I usually start out at the festival in these ABCD barns here. That is where the fleece sale is. There's a book vendor there. Some of the main booths that I like to see are typically in that area, so that is sort of where I start, and then I branch out to the others, and then sometimes I end up making my way back there throughout the day. I had made a list beforehand of the vendors that I knew I wanted to visit, just because what always happens to me is that I get there and then I immediately get overwhelmed and I just start like getting very disorganized and feeling all over the place. I had a couple of Christmas gifts to get that I was focused on. And I also knew that I wanted to get some loop bumps because I have a hard time picking things out online. I'm extremely picky about the colors and like the quality of the colors and how I see them on a screen versus how they are when they show up in the mail in real life is not always accurate for me. So I really like to see these things in person. I ended up getting two. Here they are. This one is called Sweet Smoke, and this one is called Musk. They're both about the same size, 4.4-ish ounces. I've heard a lot of people call these bats because they do sort of look like a bat that has been rolled up. It's fiber for hand spinning, but what they actually are is beautifully pin drafted roving that is arranged in this bullseye formation. And you can do a variety of things with these. What I have done with these in the past is spin them from the center out. I basically just treat this like a center pole ball of yarn, but spin from it, and then I chain ply, which keeps all of the colors together. And I have an example of what that ends up looking like, and I realized that it's basically the exact colors of both bumps that I bought this year. So I guess I'm consistent in my preferences, if nothing else. But this is what it ends up looking like. I managed to spin this relatively consistently, and it keeps all of the colors together, as you can see. So this will actually self-stripe when I knit with it. So you can make socks, or it's really a nice look for color work in a garment if you have like a solid background color, and then the colors of the this as the contrast color will slowly change as you go through the color work. So you can do a lot of things with these. But now with these, the reason that I got the two that have basically the same colors but in reverse is that I am thinking about plying these together. So I'll just have one giant skein of yarn from both of these bumps. And then if I spin both of them from the center, they should end up being relatively similar throughout the whole skein, but it will be very barber poled because we'll have like light against dark on the outside and light against dark on the inside. So we'll see. I am not 100% decided on what I'm gonna do with these, but when I figure it out, I'm sure that I will show it to you. After Loop, we were really on the lookout for a gift for Frank's mom because I'm making her a cardigan for Christmas, and we wanted to find some sort of pin or stick or some like a piece of jewelry to hold it closed because it's an open front cardigan. I didn't have a vendor in mind for this, and so we were just sort of on the lookout as we were walking around. And I believe it was in the same barn as Loop. It was in one of those 4 main barns that we found the perfect thing at the Bialopaden Designs booth. This is a metalsmith based in Brooklyn, New York, and she makes just really interesting pieces. So I'm wearing the other thing that we got there. Frank bought this for me, which was very nice. And the piece that we got for his mother is this one. She had all of these displayed really nicely, like hanging up in fabric so you could see what type of material would be appropriate for the size that this is. And I had immediately noticed this one, but I wanted Frank to pick out what he wanted for his mom. So I was pumped when he eventually gravitated towards exactly the one that I thought would be perfect for the garment. It's just like a little pin, so this will go through the front of the cardigan. Let's see. Just like this. Frank's mother's an artist too, so I think that this will be right up her alley for Christmas. At this point, I had started to feel a little bit overwhelmed. As far as safety, I think that the festival organizers did a great job this year. There were a lot of empty booths, whether it was because some vendors didn't show up or because some vendors were situated outside, whereas in previous years they had been inside. There was more room in every barn where there was an empty stall where you could sort of get out of the way if you were feeling like there were too many people. I wasn't necessarily feeling overwhelmed by the amount of people around me because I did feel like I was able to distance, but I had started to get a combo of lots of people, lots of things to look at, and I was feeling directionless. This always happens to me. So I said, let's go and look at the books, because usually I save that until the end when I'm too tired to really look at them, and I wanted to make sure that I could see what's out there because I like looking at these things in person. At the time that I went, Gudrun Johnston was there, and she has a new book called The Shetland Trader. It's volume 3. And I made a beeline and fangirled. This is the book. I think a lot of people are going crazy for it currently because look at this sweater on the front cover. I had seen this on Instagram in the week leading up to Rhinebeck maybe, but I didn't register like what it was or who the designer was. And so when I saw Gudrun Johnston and I walked up and realized, oh, that's her book, all of the samples are right there, I'm buying it. Like, I don't even need to think about it. And then this book very quickly became what dictated my yarn purchases. I had a couple of loose plans of vendors that I knew I wanted to visit to buy yarn from them specifically, and projects that I maybe wanted to do, but they were very vague plans. It was like, maybe I want to make a DK weight sweater, so I'll get a sweater quantity of DK, you know, that sort of thing. But then I very quickly decided this is what I wanted to buy yarn for at Rhinebeck, period, the end, and that was what sort of started my search from that point. I honestly didn't even look at what else was in this book until later that night when I got it back to the Airbnb and started looking through everything. But there is a lot in here that I would like to make. There's a beautiful write-up about the inspiration behind these designs, and so they're largely based in Gudrun's mother's designs from her knitwear company that she was running during the 1970s. So you can definitely see that 70s influence, but I think that a lot of these have been modernized in just a really nice way that doesn't make them look like you stepped out of a vintage catalog. Here's another colorway of that same design, which is called Vare. And there's even a third version that has straight sleeves and just a one color body, which is sort of nice if you don't want to be doing all this multicolored razor shell like the other versions. This is a pom-pom produced book, so if you've ever had a pom-pom publication before, you know that like the paper's got that nice feel, and they do these nice schematics that have lots of measurements and nice drawings, so you can really make adjustments if you need to. There's different sleeve options for this one, there's different neck options. I also really like this one. A couple of different options there as well. I, like everyone else, am obsessed with the balloon sleeve. And I'd really like to think that I have the patience to knit a dress like this. I don't know that I do, but I would like to think that I do. So that started my search for the yarn. I did end up buying 2 other things before I got to the booths where I knew I wanted to get the yarn for this, because as soon as I saw that there was a main color and 4 contrast colors, and I knew in my mind the quality of the yarn that I wanted, I knew exactly where I was gonna go. So I ran into 2 different booths before I got to that yarn and got 2 non-yarn items. The first is this piece of eco-printed yardage from Dye for Design. This particular piece is 100% raw silk. You can see the dimensions. I do not know what I'm gonna do with this yet. I don't know that I wanna make a garment with it, but maybe like a robe type, something that doesn't waste a lot of fabric, because I really don't wanna waste, I don't wanna waste this. You know, I was thinking initially I might just cut it and make like a nice dramatic scarf with it, but we'll see. I don't have to decide right away, so that's the beauty of this. This booth had a number of garments already made up, and then they had a good amount of just pieces of yardage and all different kinds of fabrics, cotton, linen, silk, rayon, interesting blends. And my understanding of this process is that the fabric is mordanted, and then these leaves and flowers and whatever else are sort of laid out on the fabric, and then it's rolled up and I think steamed or heated in some way to set this. And so you can actually wash this. I am planning to hand wash it. I definitely wouldn't want to test this with like a not gentle way of washing, but I think that it's really beautiful. They had a lot of pieces that were sort of this grayish color, and then a lot of pieces that overall had more of like a yellowish greenish color, but this is really generally not a good color on me, so I went for the more gray tinged fabric. And the other non-wool item that I got there, I have been wanting for 2 years, because I got my sister one of these in 2019 and I really regretted not getting myself one at the same time. This is made by a shaker box vendor who is always at Rhinebeck. I believe they're a husband and wife team, and they do just these beautiful objects to hold things. They also have pens and seam rippers and things that are all beautifully handcrafted like this out of wood and stained in this style. And so this, as you can see, is already being put to use for my notions. Now that I don't commute, I really don't need a box to be small to hold my notions, and this way I can see everything spread out. You can see that there are 2 compartments on this side, and this side is just one big compartment. And I love this so far because I have been using this for the last week, and I can just sort of bring it over to wherever I'm sitting and put it down, and then when I'm done working on whatever I'm working on, I can pick it up and put it up on a shelf so that animals don't get in here, and it's just a nice decorative thing at that point instead of the plastic box that I was using for my sewing kit before. I have visited this vendor every year for the past couple of years. I've bought family presents there, but never anything for myself until this year. It's been interesting to see the evolution year after year. Like, they choose to use different stains and different combinations of stains, and you can really tell that there is like an evolving process there as they're maintaining this very traditional style of woodworking but also modernizing it in a lot of ways. Finally, now to the yarn. This sweater has one main color, which you can see here is the dark color, and then there are 4 contrast colors in here. For the main color, I knew that I wanted to go to Green Mountain Spinnery and get their Lana base, which I have used in the past and is perfect. It's gonna be perfect for this. Here is the color I ended up getting, which is a dark forest green. I hope this is coming across for you. It looks like it's relatively accurate on the monitor right now. Here is the colorway. This yarn is dyed in the wool, very clearly. You can tell that by how heather it is. And this is the result of different colors of dyed wool being blended together in the card. So there is largely forest green, but there's also yellow and blue in here. And this is going to be my main color. This is 100% non-superwash wool. All of the fibers are grown in the US and it is milled in the US. And when we were on the mill tour, they mentioned that they have their wool dyed in Pennsylvania. So I believe this is a 100% American-made product, which is nice. So I got 4 skeins of that. One has been wound already. And then for my 4 contrast colors, I knew that I wanted to go to Bartlett Yarns. Bartlett Yarns this year is one of the vendors that was outside rather than inside, and I thought that that was great because their booth in the past has not had the best lighting. Like, it's just been in a location where the light isn't super great, and their colors are so beautiful and subtle that you really need to see them in natural light to really appreciate what's going on there. So I was sort of doing this on the fly. Like, I had just gotten the book, I had just gotten familiar with what I needed in terms of materials. By looking at these contrast colors here, I could tell that I needed a light, I needed something that was like a pop, like this orange, and I needed something that was a little bit darker. Here they're using a gray. And there's also a yellow in here. Yeah, so light, medium dark, a pop, and another color that wasn't going to be quite as poppy, but that could sort of serve to blend during this razor shell section right here. So here are the 4 that I came up with. This pink over here is my pop, which is a very corally, orangey pink. These 2, my light and my dark, which are, I believe, just the natural sheep colors. I'm pretty sure this darker one is undyed as well. And then this is my weird color. This is not a color that generally I would choose. Although it really doesn't look terrible on me, but I wouldn't gravitate towards a greeny yellow. They tend to not look great on me with my skin tone, but I really was just obsessed with the amount of colors in here. Do you see that green? I mean, what is up with that? It's green and orange and pink and yellow and red. There are so many colors in here that I couldn't go without using this as one of the contrast colors. And so I found this first, and then I sort of chose things to go with it. We'll see how this comes out in the swatch. This yarn is, I think, technically a sport weight, although I have definitely used it for fingering weight in the past, and the Green Mountain Spinnery is definitely a fingering weight. I think it should probably work out okay, but there you can see the whole palette. This one might be a little bit dark to use as a contrast color. If it is, I'm sure that I have something in my stash that's a little bit lighter that would work, but I will swatch and see how it comes out. And the other thing that I got at Bartlett Yarns is one of their mini skein sets. I have purchased these in the past. They're usually enough for a yoke sweater that has a lot of different contrast colors. I used one of these mini skein kits for my Damiaka Lopa. I needed one additional contrast color, but there was enough of the 4 colors to do what I needed to do for that particular sweater, if you're familiar with it, and that gives you some idea. They call these their swirls on their website. You can purchase these on their website as well. And this is the Naturals Light pack. Here they are outside of the plastic, and you can see we've got these 3 natural sheep colors, and then this one is really what drew me to that mini skein set. You can see, again, it's just a million different colors all blended together in the card. And that is what does this. It's really, these mills are doing magic. I looked around for a full skein of this, but I didn't see any. Their booth at the festival is always really just like a jumble of color, like nothing is labeled. People get super pumped up when they're in there, and so skeins can get disorganized and you have to sort of hunt for things sometimes. But I believe that this is the color that on their website they call light heather. I think it's called light heather. But I would absolutely buy like a cone of this because I'm just so obsessed with it. It's looking a little bit more vibrant here than it does in real life. It's really, that's quite accurate there. It's a very toned down color. Other than that, we did get a few more gifts that I'm not going to show because those people might be watching this podcast. And we also got a ton of food. One of the barns is just full of food vendors, and there were alcohol vendors, there were distilleries there were olive oil and balsamic vinegar makers, there were like anything you can think of that you can consume, there's probably a vendor there for it. Good. You want to look at anything else in here?
Yes.
You want to look at all the things?
I should have just spent my whole time here.
And we had gotten a good amount of lamb, cuts of lamb to bring back. And also pierogies. There's a pierogi vendor there, and they are so good. And interesting flavors. They have traditional flavors and more interesting ones. So on just this past Friday night, we had the cheese-stuffed banana pepper pierogies, and we actually had to head to the nearest supermarket to get some coolers to bring the stuff back. So luckily they had like some biodegradable coolers and bought some ice and packed up the stuff and brought it back the next day. All right, it's 2:45 p.m. We've been here since 10:30.
Yeah.
We're disheveled. We have a lot of shit. I'm gonna have to bleep that out. What is the verdict about Rhinebeck?
It's alright.
Yeah.
It's fun, yeah.
Good. I'm so glad.
Still smiling.
Yeah, we're still smiling. And we have to go buy a cooler for everything that we purchased that is a food product, which is like half of what we bought, I think. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that I essentially had no knitting for the entire Rhinebeck weekend because I'm an idiot. I've been working on a half and half triangles wrap like many others, and I have to say I'm not having like the religious experience that other people are having with it. Like, it's fine, but I'm not like, this is the greatest project of all time. But that's neither here nor there. I'm making it in the original colors, which are Kiln Red and Poppy Red, I think, or Red Poppy. I had just finished the first triangle, so the first 50% of the shawl, and I, in my own mind, had thought, you know what, I'm gonna be smarter than the pattern, and I'm not going to pick up all of these wrap and turns. So I'm just gonna cut my color 1 and just take my color 2 with me to go to Rhinebeck. If you somehow haven't seen this yet and you're not familiar with how this shawl is made, you do a bunch of short rows with wrap and turns to create half of a triangle, and then you do another series of short rows going the other way with wrap and turns to create the other half. You basically make a big square that ends up being 2 colors divided diagonally down the middle. I had cut my color 1 and I didn't bring it with me. As I'm in the car and I pull my knitting out, like somewhere between Vermont and New York State, I realize knitting this without picking these wraps up is not looking good. I think that has to do with the fact that I'm knitting at a very loose gauge, and if I had knitted more tightly the entire time, it would look fine. But I realized, like, I don't have any knitting. I had tried to use color 2 to pick up the wraps and sort of keep going, but it just didn't look right. So I essentially spent most of Rhinebeck weekend trying to like figure out a way to use color 2 to fix this, and then I spent the second half of the weekend unraveling all of the work that I had done. So net total of 0 knitting that weekend, but what are you gonna do? So that is my 2021 Rhinebeck recap. I'm going to put all of the vendors that I bought stuff from down below just in case you want to go investigate any of their wares. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.